It's really great to be here with Simon Barrington, no stranger to any of us here at Burlington. And Simon's written another book as part of a lockdown project, co-authored this book called Just Leadership. And let's kick this conversation off, Simon, if we can, by me asking you, given that there are hundreds of books on leadership, and you and I have read a fair few of those, why another one? What was it that you were chasing down in a nutshell with Just Leadership?
I think mainly I've spent far too much of my life sending ambulances to the bottom of a cliff to rescue situations where leaders have fallen or organizations have fallen apart. In conversation with Justin Humphreys, who I co-wrote this book with, who's the chief exec of the safeguarding charity 31A, we were kind of going, how do we start to build a fence at the top of the cliff? Wouldn't it be better if actually leaders didn't fall in the first place? What is it about the environment that needs to change? What it is about the way we develop leaders, be that church leaders, small group leaders, leaders in school, leaders in business, leaders in charity, in small groups, big organizations, small organizations. How do we change the narrative about the type of leaders that we want to see, the way that they're developed and the way that they act? And really, this was an attempt to start a conversation about that and to get that going. So that's one strand. The other strand was everybody's getting so excited, rightly so, and passionate about joining in with the justice movement right now, be that climate justice, be it justice for vaccines to every country around the world, be it racial justice, be it social justice. We're rightly being questioned about how we're getting involved in that. But I think there's a deeper conversation than just about us rocking up at events and supporting events. There's a deeper question about justice that goes right to our hearts and right to what it means to be a leader, and that requires a radical revolution of our hearts as leaders as we join in with those causes. So it's not a but, it's an and. Yeah, we do both, but actually, how do we do that radical revolution of our hearts as well?
Brilliant, that's so helpful. And for those of us thinking about reading the book, if we haven't already, how would you kind of summarize that narrative? You're looking for a change in narrative around leadership, or use the phrase a revolution in leadership. Just describe that very briefly for us to help us get some handle on what the book's about.
Yeah, well, I think Psalm 89 verse 14 is pretty foundational for me, in that it says righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. So it's talking about God, and righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne, and love and faithfulness flow from it. And so there's this concept in the Old Testament and in Scripture, not of God doing justice, but of God being just. Actually, it's the foundation of who he is, that he loves to see justice, and actually love and faithfulness and justice and peace and shalom and wholeness are all kind of bound up in one sense of who God is and the way that he acts, and a desire that actually we see that in our leaders and in ourselves. And actually, I would say, in everybody, not just in leaders. You can read this book and actually, even if you're not a leader, get an idea of actually what it means to live out a just life. I mean, I tell a story in the book of how I got involved in justice causes with Live Aid in 1985. Remember the big stadium in Wembley, and there'd been a famine in Ethiopia and over 1 million people killed and 200,000 children killed as part of that. And my heart was moved by that and needing to respond. And then over the years, I've obviously got involved in Samaritan's Purse and tackling justice globally, but then also in the UK with TLG and kids at risk of exclusion, or Kintsugi Hope and mental health and well-being. But those are just outward expressions of a heart revolution, which is, what does it mean to put other people first? What does it mean to create an environment in which everyone thrives? Because when injustice happens and churches fall apart and leaders fall, what happens? Everybody gets impacted. Everybody gets hit by that injustice. We all stop thriving. We all stop growing. We all stop being the people who God has made us to be. So there's this sense of, I want everyone to be in a situation where leaders are leading into an environment where we can fully bear the image that God has put on each of us, where everyone, I'd want Burlington or Forge Leadership or TLG or anything that I'm involved in to be a place where people are more and more aware that this is how God has made them, this is who they are, but also aware of their brokenness. And in the midst of those two things, there's this beautiful outworking of God's in-breaking justice coming as we see relationships restored, as we see people healed, as we see people restored and communities restored as well. So it's a huge picture. But I've aimed this as leaders because I think leaders have a particular responsibility to create the environment in which those kind of things can happen.
And I can say this, the book does really helpfully move from orthodoxy, what we believe about God and who he is, and therefore what we understand about ourselves, to orthopraxy is very practical outworking as well of taking hold of those big beliefs rooted in Psalm 89 and other places in Scripture and working that into our modern context, both in terms of church and business and charity and leadership right across. Just finally, Simon, it's a personal journey for you, though, in so many ways. God calls us to do different things at different times. So justice has always been something at the heart of who you are, which is kind of what gave birth, I guess, to Just Leadership ultimately in terms of your involvement with it. Just tell us a little bit about that, where it comes from.
Yeah, I think my own journey has been one, as I said, of a growing realization of how God's made me and the particular gifting and skills that he's given me and the calling to step out in courage in those, at the same time as wrestling with my flawed and brokenness, wrestling with rejection, wrestling with lack of affirmation, and really having to allow God to take me on a healing journey so that I can be the kind of leader that people want to follow, that the kind of leader that can create spaces where other people can thrive. And that requires a deep inner work, and it's a hard work. And I think I've said a number of times as the book's got launched, if someone was about to give me £1 million right now, which I know we're trying to do the building and everything, so do that first, right, with the sanctuary. But then you give me £1 million, I'd spend it on sending every leader on counselling, therapy, and prayer ministry before they ever step into a leadership position, because leadership is tough, it's demanding, it's complex, it's challenging. People don't give you easy problems to solve, they're big problems to solve and complex problems to solve. And so you can't go into that without trusting God wholly with who you are and how he's made you, and doing the deeper inner work of allowing him to shape you into who he wants you to be. And that's hard work. And it's a daily work, it's a daily practice of kind of holding those two things in balance, made in the image of God, beautiful and yet broken and flawed, and within that seeking to work out God's purpose for our lives as we do that together in community as well.
And 5 years' time, you look back over the launch of the book and so on, what would make you think, do you know what, that did what we longed for it to do in God's heart?
Yeah,
what would you like to have seen?
I think a conversation to have started. There's a proverb, a Ghanaian proverb in the book, which is basically, it's good to invite you to my table, but it's better to invite you to my kitchen. Okay, which is basically saying, let's start a conversation about what can be created that's new here. Let's not serve up the same old food on the table of leadership failures and leadership problems. Let's get everybody's conversation and ideas around the table, new spices, new recipes, new input, new engagement, to go, how can we see a world transformed to be more life-giving, more wholehearted, more full of joy, more thriving, more sense of community than ever before? Is that possible? And what would society look like? And the church has a massive role to play in that, and we talk about that in the book, of the church bringing God's justice in a life-giving, wholehearted, transformational way into our communities.
Great, Simon, thank you so much. So just a reminder about Just Leadership, and if you haven't seen, there's also a series that accompanies the launch of the book on TBN. That's on Thursday evenings. You can catch up those that you've already missed. So look out for that on TBN as well. Simon, thanks ever so much indeed.
Thanks, Simon.